very much the secret history for girls. Leigh Bardugo can write the hell out of a straight romance, even if you're not a raging communist. It feels like a 23-year-old man from the 20th century wrote it. Don't do a fucking MFA program. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Léna, and today I'm giving you my back to school reading list. You may wonder, like, what do you mean back to school? Didn't you graduate literally last year? And yes, I did, but I'm an idiot, and so I'm going back to school this fall. After a year of part-time jobs and insane internships, I'm going back to school. I really wasn't planning on it. I was a communications major, so I was more thinking along the lines of like around my half-life crisis, going to do some kind of media studies PhD to write about memes or whatever. But turns out I'm in the midst of my quarter-life crisis, and so I applied to a film production program and I got in. So here I am. Generally, I feel quite ambivalent about higher education and academia, especially after having spent so much time in it, which I've talked about a little bit in my Dark Academia video, but I wanted to make a list of the books that, to me, show a wide picture of what academia is, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The epic highs and lows, if you will. So the first book I want to talk about is Transcendent Kingdom by gyasi. It's about Gifty. She's a PhD candidate in Stanford. She's a neuroscientist studying addictive behaviors in mice. When her mom has a mental health crisis, she unexpectedly comes to live with her, and it leads her to dive back into her childhood years. So the book goes back and forth between her present, finishing her PhD, and her past, her childhood growing up in the South as a black kid from West African parents, the huge role of religion in her household, her brother's addiction, and the threat of her existential questions and both religion and science's inability to answer them. I think it's rare to have a West African protagonist in higher education with a point of view that's not like miserabilist or like overly insisting on the meritocratic nature of their life. And I really like how gyasi humanizes all these flawed characters and doesn't reduce them to stereotypes or archetypes. Like even talking about the difficult mother-daughter relationship, I think it manages to escape the usual tropes of like a immigrant parent who is hard on their children because America is going to be hard on them anyways. And it deals with the topic of education in a really subtle way, like how education can create a gap between how you were raised and how you live. Like for Gifty, that's religion, but also parental relationships, and how hard it can be to bridge that gap. But it's also a part of growing up, growing into an adult. I really love in the book descriptions of lab work, how she thinks about the mice, how she thinks about her research, her struggles writing her articles, and the whole way that process is described feels really lived in. I guess I like books about scientists or people with scientific minds because I think writers usually have a bias for protagonists who are more literary types. But I like being in the mind of a scientist. I think it demystifies the idea that they have to be super rational or some different brand of human. They still doubt and hesitate and like ask themselves really human questions. I like also that it was mostly hopeful about academia, that for Gifty, that academic pursuit of excellence was a kind of lifeline, something she used not to like pick herself up by her bootstraps, which is a narrative I don't believe in, and I don't think the author does either, but as a way of constructing a self that she could live with, of answering existential questions, or at least keep trying, and that was really compelling to me. Then I read Real Life by Brendan Taylor. I think it has a lot of similarities with Transcendent Kingdom. Wallace, the main character, is a black southern queer protagonist in a scientific degree. He studies biochemistry in a Midwestern university, I believe, and he experiences a lot of loneliness and alienation from his white, more privileged peers. But I think real life has a hardness and a bitterness to it that I didn't find in Transcendent Kingdom, maybe because it's more rooted in Taylor's personal experience of grad school, but it also does have beautiful lab work descriptions, but a lot more interpersonal violence, both in words and physically. I really liked the honesty with which it talked about desirability politics and how it laid bare the complex dynamics of friendship groups of people who should behave like adults but are really kind of scared kids deep down. I think that's a reality of becoming an adult in a campus bubble where, especially for people who are very privileged and they go from straight from undergrad to grad school, they keep having the same impulses and reflexes as teenagers. It's also a book that's interested in what it looks like to give up and make a U-turn even when you've sank so much into a degree or field, and to give up not only all of that work but also all of the recognition and status that comes with like being in grad school. It's very much grad school critical. Like if you need to read a book to convince yourself to drop out of your postgrad program, this is the one, I think. And my next book is Bunny by Mona Awad. It's, to me, the quintessential don't do a fucking MFA program book. Like, it's very much about the underlying horror of this kind of literary scene. So it's about Sam. She's the only scholarship student in her MFA program and she's very isolated. All the rich girls are friends with each other and they all call each other Bunny, which she finds ridiculous and quite culty. When she is finally invited into their group, she discovers how deep the ridiculousness and the culty shit goes. I think it's probably the funniest book on this list. It's both nonsensical, because there are a lot of supernatural elements that are never fully explained, and also very real. Like if you've ever been around writers or artists who are really deep in academia and bullshit grant writing, they use like a lot of social justice and pop feminism buzzwords to cover up for the fact that they're not very good people. And it's fine, like most of us are not very good people, but it's like the worst person you know will have intersectional feminists safe space in their Instagram bio, but will still privately be a fatphobic bully. So if you've ever been around these kind of people, this book will hit. Like it is a kind of gleeful takedown of a certain kind of white woman writer who's very exploitative and appropriative in their work. I love that Sam is an unreliable narrator and that she genuinely struggles with everything like writing, human relationships, even just like keeping herself alive. I think she almost dies in her apartment, which is very unsanitary and a dump, which is very Richard Payton coded of her. Like, actually, Bunny is very much the secret history for girls who write a Substack and wonder if they should apply to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Or if you watch Girls HBO and you identify with Anna Horvath, for better or for worse, this book is for you. The next book on this list is Disorientation by Elaine Chou. It's about Ingrid. She's an American Taiwanese student and she's writing her PhD thesis on a late Chinese American poet when, during her research, she makes a shocking discovery that basically sets fire to her campus. It's like Yellowface before Yellowface if it was on a campus. It really dives into campus politics and factions. It's a satirical novel that's supposed to be a hyperbole of the culture wars, but I feel like campus culture wars have gotten so big and ridiculous that it might not be outlandish enough anymore to qualify as hyperbolic full satire. I think I liked it more than Yellowface because you're in the point of view of an actually likable character. She's very flawed, And she's very frustrating, especially at first, because she's super passive character. Like, she kind of found her way into this program, this life, her friends, her boyfriend, because she takes on what people project onto her. And it's not uncommon in higher education, especially grad school, PhD kind of stuff. Like, I talked to a guy once who ended up being in his PhD program because he didn't find work immediately after his master's, and his thesis director was like, yeah, you should do a PhD, and so he did. Which is crazy to me, to take on such a huge commitment just because someone told you to. Like, that seems wild. But Ingrid is very passive in that way. Like, throughout the book, then she gains agency and power through like navigating the scandal that kind of transforms her life and makes her see the people in her life in a different way. I love how this book plays with archetypes of campus politics and shows a different side to them, like the SJW, the kind of moderate activist, the reactionary tenured professor, Jordan Peterson, the incel, etc., etc. Like, it was a fun read. I really enjoyed it. Okay, we're getting to probably my favorite book I've read this year, Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And more broadly, the books in the Alex Stern series. First of all, a lot of people recommended this book to me in the comments of my Dark Academia video, and I did buy it. And that was in 2021, but I only read it this summer. And I want to say, like, why did no one tell me this book was this good? But people did tell me, I just didn't listen. But basically, it's about Alex Stern. She's a high school dropout who is a low-level drug dealer, and she can also see ghosts. And one day she is the only survivor of a very weird and unexplainable killing spree. And after surviving this event, she's tapped by Yale University to join one of 9 magical societies in Yale. She is basically there to use her gift of seeing ghosts to help them oversee magical dealings. And in exchange, she gets a full ride scholarship to Yale. So she joins leigh, which is the 9th house, and it's supposed to oversee the 8 other magical societies and make sure their rituals are safe and adhere to the rules that allow them to continue to exist along non-magical society. Yale societies are basically if every conspiracy theory ever about like the Illuminati and the Freemasons and shit was real. Like, they do really shady magic. They read the future of the stock exchange in a guy's bowels. So yeah. And Alex really struggles to adapt to Yale life beyond the magic. She struggles to keep up with the academic demands of that environment, and she's being mentored by Darlington, who is a kind of heir to this like old money Connecticut industrial family and a Yale academic through and through. And he's also has kind of an unhealthy fascination and obsession with the occult. If you've read The Raven Cycle, I think he's definitely the Genzi type, down to like the early brush with death. Throughout all this, Alex will be faced with kind of a series of violent events that will lead her to dig deeper into the history of Yale and New Haven and uncover some of their darkest secrets. Alex Stern is such an interesting character to put into an academic environment. She's very combative, very angry, and she has this gray morality where her main goal in all situations is to survive and keep going. And that both helps her and makes it harder for her to adapt to this kind of polite society that Yale is. Like, her very presence questions the world of it, like the respectability politics of it. I think a lot of elite institutions face that because they are very happy to welcome scholarship or first generation students, but they do very little to adapt the world of academia to them or even help them adapt to it, while still propping themselves up as places that have some kind of moral, ethical standard, even though deep down they're still perpetuating deep-rooted oppression like classism, sexism, racism, etc. For me, Ninth House is the outright critic of academia that the secret history never could be. And it's not against the secret history, because I've read reviews arguing that it's supposed to be a critic of elite academia, and to some extent I agree, but the secret history is just too subtle, too vague, just too white, and just too wrapped up in the lore of the actual real life people it's about to truly say anything incisive about academia. Like, the core of it is that institutions exploit, use and abuse, and they will chew you up and spit you out unless you conform. And Ninth House really gets that. Especially, I love in the second novel, Alex becomes more like her mentor. She really starts to absorb the way he thinks about history and place and magic, and it's not all bad. Like, I mean, we wouldn't pursue education at the cost that it is if it was all bad, because there's real pleasure in knowledge, in understanding the world a little better. But at some point, Alex really gets to that bittersweet place of both resenting Yale and the societies for what they put her through, but also loving it and wanting to stay, because it's the place she's felt the safest and felt like she belonged the most, and like she was actually armed with the knowledge and also literal weapons to face a hostile world. And I feel the same way about my alma mater. Like, that's where I learned about imperialism, capitalism, decolonial and abolitionist thought and stuff, and I met some of the smartest, most politically engaged people I know. But also, it's a place that claims to care about its impact on the world and to care about its student body, but they will call the cops on students that demand to cut ties with Israeli institutions. And so at the end of the day, it's all about self-interest and profit. And it's so frustrating because they teach you how to think like a revolutionary, and then they expect you to uphold the status quo. And it's a really painful experience. So I felt really seen by how well Bardugo explored that aspect of academia. And plus, the Alex Arlington dynamic is hot as fuck. Like, Leigh Bardugo can write the hell out of a straight romance. Let me tell you, she's really good. She's really good at this. I mean, if you've read The Six of Crows duology, then you know. Okay, my last fiction recommendation is a classic because, of course, I need to uphold my reputation as a pretentious nerd. It's This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's a coming-of-age novel about a young man who goes to Princeton and doesn't do a lot of studying, then fights in World War One and comes back to his whole world change. He dates women, tries to do some social climbing, but doesn't really succeed at that. And it's really all about life in the early 20th century and kind of everything that went wrong and the disillusions of youth. It's Fitzgerald's first novel. He wrote it when he was 23, and it feels like it. Like, it feels like a 23-year-old man from the 20th century wrote it. But I don't know, I find it very charming. It's not on par with his other works. I think it feels a bit more experimental and meandering, but I can already read into it a lot of the themes that will end up in Gatsby, so that's fun. That's a really interesting look at a different part of collegiate life earlier in history. Okay, then I have some non-fiction recommendations for you. You should, of course, read The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. As a first-year student, especially if you study social sciences and history and stuff, you probably will read it because it's such a landmark work from the 19th century. And it's super short, like it's 48 pages. You have no excuse not to read it, even if you're not a raging communist. I'm not saying it radicalized me, but I think it's very important to understand the world you live in. And it's not a complicated piece of political theory. It's a pamphlet, so it was made to convince people, and that makes it a very readable text. And you'll be shocked at how much still applies to politics and the world to this day. Like, you'll be shocked. Okay, next. I can't make a non-fiction reading list about the epic highs and lows of academia without mentioning Pierre Bourdieu. And I know every sociology major is groaning right now, but you just have to read the guy. Like, he has talked at length about the mechanisms of social reproduction at play in education, and I highly recommend, especially if you're the first in your family to go to uni. He writes about the specifics of the French system, but I think broadly his work applies to Western university systems in general. He talks about this in The Inheritors and Reproduction in Education, Society and Culture. He talks about social determinism and how, despite its claims, education very often doesn't break cycles of poverty or wealth, but reinforces them. It's really fascinating, and it will do wonders for your imposter syndrome to learn about that, I promise. And my final recommendation for this back-to-school reading list is Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. I'm not being dramatic when I say that this book changed my life, and it's probably my fave nonfiction book of all time. It completely changed how I think. It's about work and the political organization of work, and really how financial capitalism creates work that is lacking in meaning and that creates little to no value and maybe even negative value. It's so smart and funny and readable, and I don't know, I think it's essential. Like, as you step into your first student job or your first adult job, it's key to have clarity about what it is you're doing in the world, what you're contributing to, if you find that work meaningful, and if not, is there an alternative? Like, in a way, this book is a tiny part of me going back to school to do something that actually feels meaningful to me and not still be stuck writing tweets for unethical companies. I read this halfway through my communications degree, and it really shook me and told me, like, there's gotta be something else you want more than this. And there is. Yay! So, okay, this was my back-to-school reading list. I expect book reports in the comment section by the end of the semester. Good luck if you're going back to school. It can be great, it can be awful. I hope you find what you're looking for there. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you read some of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts about them. And leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Oh yeah, I wore my Cambridge t-shirt for this video, but I never attended Cambridge. I just went there for summer camp. But I do like it. It's a really good t-shirt. It's like almost 10 years old. They make good merch. One thing about like higher education is it's usually really good merch. This is old as fuck.